This show is listener supported. You can join us and help our show grow to support more adoptees by going to adopteeson.com/partner. You are listening to Adoptees On, the podcast where adoptees discuss the adoption experience. This is episode 119, Mary. I'm your host, Haley Radke. Today, I am honored to introduce you to Mary O'Rourke. Mary shares the difficult news she received in her non-identifying information at age 21. We discuss her reunion with her birth mother and sister, the added complexity of coming out twice as queer, and how she ended up finding a grief support group and an adoption competent therapist. We are going to reference sexual violence at a few points during this episode, so please make sure you're listening without little ears around and that you're in a safe headspace if that topic is difficult for you. We are going to wrap up with some recommended resources, and as always, links to everything we'll be talking about today are on the website adopteeson.com. Let's listen in. I'm so pleased to welcome to Adoptees On, Mary O'Rourke. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Haley. How are you?
I'm doing really well, and I'm really excited to chat with you. Thanks so much for agreeing to share your story with us. Why don't you start out with that?
Sure. I am about 24 years old now, but in April of 2016, so I was about 21 years old at the time, my older adopted sister, was 24 at the time, and she wanted to request her non-identifying information. And my adoptive mom always told us that if we searched, we had to search together because she wanted us to have each other. And so my adoption was a closed adoption. I didn't know anything about my relinquishment or, conception story or anything like that. And so I had just turned 21, which is the minimum age that you have to be to request your non-identifying information.
In what state?
Massachusetts. So I was adopted through Catholic Charities in Massachusetts. They no longer actually do adoption. They still have their reunion services, but they don't do private adoption anymore. So I had just turned 21, requested my non-identifying information, and I was definitely in the fog and very ignorant to the impact that this would have. I didn't think it was going to be a big deal. I was like, sure, that might be interesting to learn about. Let me see what this is all about. And so I was standing in the lobby of my crappy college apartment, and I just opened the large manila envelope that Catholic Charities had sent me. And I was just gripping the banister so I wouldn't pass out because I had no idea what I was going to open. And I learned for the first time that day, the story of my relinquishment, and that, my birth mother was 15 years old when I was conceived, and she had been raped continuously by my birth father for over a year at that time. I believe she was about 13 or 14 years old when it first happened. And my birth father was 24, and he was actually married to my birth mother's sister, my biological aunt. Both of my birth parents, they were in-laws. And so some of the circumstances around my birth mother's family life, her parents were both abusive alcoholics, and they were often neglectful. So her home wasn't really what I would call stable. I think that, along with her being so young and the circumstances around my conception, wanting me to be safe from my birth father, were reasons in the pro column for relinquishment. I was born 2 months early, and I weighed, I looked in the little records, I weighed 1745 grams, which is about 3.8 pounds. Ron, my birth father, did not want to relinquish his parental rights, but he had to go to court for statutory rape charges. Sentencing took 8 months. So even though my birth mother wanted me to be placed with the family right away, I ended up in foster care for 8 months. In the non-identifying records, it states specifically that my biological aunt Katie, who was the one who was married to Ron, said she wanted to raise me, but that she was not interested in raising me if my birth father was sentenced to a long sentence. Like, I will adopt her only if Ron doesn't go to prison. The social worker who sent me the information was also the same worker that handled the case 21 years ago. So she met with both Ron and my birth mother, and she relayed to me that she's never forgotten the case and that she remembers specifically how unremorseful Ron was, like had no concept that what he did was wrong. It was also clear to me based on Ron's physical description that I looked a lot like him. Like in particular, my eyes, which are like big and blue, and they were always the first thing that anyone ever complimented. And so that day and learning that changed a lot about my relationship with myself and my body. Like my body never really felt like mine anymore in a way that it had before. I think for adoptees, we often find joy and comfort when we meet our first families and we can see ourselves in them because it's a really unique experience that you haven't had before. You finally see someone with your traits, and I did get some of that in reunion, but physically I look a lot like him, which has been difficult. Obviously, I don't want to be like someone who did something so terrible. So in April, that's when I got the records. And in July, I had my first phone call with my birth mother, Meg. We exchanged letters in between that time. And I kind of see my relationship with her as something positive that came out of this. I had responded to letters that she had left to me when growing up. She wrote one to me when I was maybe about 8 years old, another one when I was 18. So I had a few letters to respond to her to get us started. That was in my non-identifying information. So I had no idea growing up that those things were left for me. There was also a baby book that I had no idea about that had a picture of us the day I was born, and just a picture of me. So 2 pictures, pictures of me in foster care. And also my name was Hope Why Not, which I always kind of say is really corny, but also really sweet. And so she wrote down the Emily Dickinson poem for me, Hope is a Thing with Feathers. And I actually got, my birth name tattooed on me as Why Not, Hope with a feather, which is just an aside that I thought was sweet and a good way to honor that. So yeah, I didn't get that until I got my non-identifying information. So after our first phone call in July, we met for the first time in August of 2016. We got lunch. It was me, my adoptive sister, and Meg is my birth mom, Meg's other daughter, Marie, who she raised. She's 4 years younger than I am. So at the time, I think she was 17. She's about 20 years old currently. Yeah, we got lunch. It was super, I think we were all really nervous. No one really ate anything. Marie told me that Meg was shaking the car ride over there, just feel shaking on the steering wheel because she was so nervous. It was clear to me from the beginning how well Meg and I connected, and that wasn't really something that I felt with my adoptive parents. As much as I love them, I think adoption is all about holding two seemingly oppositional things at once, like the love with the anger, the grief with gratitude, which is, I know, a loaded word in adoptee land. I don't subscribe to the grateful adoptee narrative, but for me personally, I am grateful that I received basic human rights of love and necessities, because those rights aren't necessarily afforded to all of us. And so meeting Meg was kind of holding the truth and the relief of, oh, I fit, I make sense here, with the painful realization that, oh, I could have made sense all along. I didn't have to grow up in this world where I didn't make sense my whole life. I will say, of course, nurture has an impact on who you are. I like to compare being an adoptee in reunion to being a round peg repeatedly jammed into a square hole. So by the time you meet the round hole, you no longer fit there either because your round edges have been beat up over the years. So now you're just like a wonky hexagon. So
That is so good. I have never heard that before. That's like the perfect description.
I'm glad you can relate. I didn't know how relatable that was going to be, but yeah, we're just a bunch of wonky hexagons. What can you say?
Oh my gosh. Is that going to be the title of this episode? Okay, thank you for sharing all of that. That is, whoa. I mean, my jaw was on the floor the whole time you were talking, and there's so many things I want to ask you about. So can we let's pause here, because I want to go back to, you don't even really necessarily want to search. Like, it's not really your idea. You're kind of going along because your sister is looking. And what is it like to be, 21, which is, my friend, that's very young, to be 21 and open up this envelope and get this like really devastating information about your conception?
I mean, shock is the only word I can really describe it as. It's not what I expected, right? There's no quote unquote normal adoptee story, but I think mine is particularly abnormal, or else it felt like it was time. I think there are probably a lot more people that have had a similar story that it's just not represented in adoptee narratives or in the media or anything like that. So it was very shocking. It was very painful. I was very angry. I can't say I'm not still angry. I really felt guilt almost, even though obviously I had no choice in the matter. I felt guilty for Meg that she had to go through that for me to be born. Or like she was on bed rest for 2 months, just like a lot of guilt for everything that she had to do for me. And obviously anger at Ron and anger at a lot of the other adults in the story for not realizing what was happening over the course of over a year that this was happening.
Mm-hmm.
No one stepped in. As soon as Meg told her parents that she was pregnant, they knew it was Ron. They said it before she did.
What?
And so, yes. So the fact that they kind of had an inkling, like maybe they didn't know 100%, but that they had an inkling that this was happening and they didn't intervene at all is really upsetting. My biological aunt's reaction to it was very upsetting. I mean, that was written out in the non-identifying information. So there was a lot of anger there.
You also said, my body didn't feel like mine anymore when you read Ron's physical description and kind of, looking in the mirror thinking like, oh, do I look like him?
Mm-hmm.
How did that impact you?
It's impacted me a lot. Even though I was a kid, like I grew up with glasses and acne. I was made fun of a lot. Actually, both of those things are his traits. I had pretty good self-confidence and self-worth, surprisingly. Like, I don't know how that happened. I don't know how I got away with that. But yeah, looking in the mirror and seeing his face in his traits just kind of felt like another decision that I didn't get to make. It felt like almost his mark, like his ownership on me that I didn't want to associate myself with. Yeah, or even if Meg, I worry that if she looks into my eyes or my face, that she sees him and what that experience is like for her. Like someone who abused her for all that time, and I'm him, basically.
Wow. So when you first wrote to her, you already knew these things. I
did. So that was all in the non-identifying information packet. it also said some really sickening things, like Ron described himself as a cheerful family man that donated to charities. Like that was his description of himself. So there's infuriating tidbits like that. But the first time we were exchanging letters, she just kind of said, I hope you're not angry with me. I love you so much. I hope we can reconnect. But, this is in your hands. Like, I will always be here waiting for you, but this is your decision to make, and I'll respect whatever decision it is that you make.
So when you meet and you're having a meal together, and it's not just you and her, you've got two sisters. Yeah. What happens from there?
From there, we at the dinner itself, or just in life, after that day?
Well, both, because we kind of paused there at was it lunch, supper? What did you guys have?
Yeah, I think it was lunch.
What did you order? Nobody ate anything. So you ordered food, nobody ate anything.
Yeah, we got a hot pot, and I usually am really good about eating a ton of food at hot pot, but I just couldn't do it. It was that moment was meaningful in that it was the first time that I was meeting my birth mother and my biological sister. So it was meaningful in that way, but there was so much tension and awkwardness, I think, with that meeting that it wasn't we deeply connected that first meeting. It had been easier to talk on the phone. It had been easier to, I think, express feelings over letters. So this was kind of just getting the nerves out, I think, the first time we met. Here's this strange thing that's happening, and how are we deal with this? And it's also, we did have other people there. And so it's a little bit of managing relationships and trying to make sure that everyone's included. And actually that day, my adoptive sister, got information about her birth parents. And so she had to leave halfway through to meet someone to get it. So it was kind of a crazy day where everything was just happening all at once. But after that day, and still now, we talk on the phone almost every single day, and we see each other as often as we can. One of the most impactful things was learning that Meg was also queer. And I use queer as a blanket term for LGBT. We're using it as a blanket term. I know it wasn't always used that way. I am gay, and I had my first queer relationship, I put that in quotations, when I was really young. I was 13 years old, and my adoptive parents, particularly my mom, they were not supportive of the relationship or me being gay. When she found out I was still seeing this person after she told me not to, I came home and my room was trashed, and anything she could find from the person that I was dating was thrown out. Letters, pictures from school dances. And at the time, I didn't know the circumstances around my conception, but she started yelling that I was, quote, like this because of my father, and that he was a rapist, and that I was just like him, and that she hated me. And it really felt at that time, when I was 13, 14 years old, that she was second guessing adopting me. And at the time, I didn't really believe her or make the connection to my birth father because I didn't know that story. And I didn't know anything about my birth. I didn't know that they knew anything about my birth family. And I almost didn't want to believe it.
Right. Yeah.
And it was only later, when I was, 21 and in early reunion, that I made the connection. And eventually my mom and I's relationship did improve, and she loved and accepted my college partner. But by that time, I had made the connection. My mother was terminally ill with cancer, and she was very close to death and much too ill to have a meaningful conversation. So she died shortly after I turned 22. And I love my mother, and I'm not telling any of these stories to cause anyone any pain or for vengeance, but I've learned in my life as an adoptee, and in particular a queer adoptee, that secrets that others have tried to make me keep about myself are toxic and add shame to my experience. and I can't hold them anymore. And the fact that I even felt like I had to make that disclaimer is part of the loyalty that adoptees feel like they are betraying in reunion.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's hard to know that had I grown up with Meg, my coming out story would have been a lot easier. I have several biological cousins and family members that have also come out as queer, and that would have been a completely different experience for me.
Mm-hmm.
And the intersectionality of my queerness and being adopted has affected me in reunion, in particular with Meg's parents, so my biological grandparents. At first, her parents were very excited to meet me until they learned that I was gay. And then they said they would meet me, quote, socially, but didn't want a relationship with me. So.
But did you say Meg was queer?
Yes.
That she identifies as that? And are her parents okay with that? Or like.
So she's not out to her parents. She's married to a wonderful man now.
Okay.
And she said that she didn't want to come out to them because then she would lose her relationship to them, and her siblings won't take care of her parents in their old age. So I kind of agreed to be the lone out person, because when you pin that against two elderly people dying alone, the choice seems easy.
So what does seeing you socially but not having a relationship with, what does that even mean?
Right. I mean, like, I still ask myself the same thing, but I did meet them at a family party, and particularly Meg's mother was very rude to me the whole time, didn't want to talk to me, very snappy at anything I would say, like, can I clear your plate? Like, just very snappy. What's interesting is I'm left-handed, and I got that from her. So the one time she was kind of remotely nice to me was when she noticed I was like cutting cheese or something, and she noticed I was cutting it with my left hand. And I think she said something about it. She was like, oh, this person is related to me somehow. But also, it's complicated, right? Because they weren't great parents. I don't think that they're maybe decent grandparents to the kids that they were grandparents to their entire lives, but they're not the most loving people in general. There's just that added layer.
Yeah. Do you have any advice or thoughts on this for other adopted people who are maybe fearful of searching because maybe they did have a bad experience coming out to their adoptive families, and then there's this whole other layer of searching and having to do that again? I liked what you just said. Like, you're like, I'm telling them up front because I want to know, do you have any other thoughts on that? What would you say to someone who is in your similar position?
It is hard because you put yourself up for secondary rejection even more than if you were just an adoptee that was searching in general. I would probably recommend, obviously this is the way I did it. I can't tell you how it would have worked out in your circumstance or if you had done it the other way. But for me, it was easier to approach the relationship with honesty. And the good thing is that in a way, for me, it was almost easier because I was meeting these people as adults. It was harder in some ways, but easier in another, where I was meeting these people as adults. And so I was more comfortable with my feelings and my feelings around being gay and coming out. And I had done it before, I had been out for a long time at that point. So maybe wait until you're at a really good place with yourself and your identity before you reach out, because I do think you have to have a little bit of a thicker skin. Also, try and get that up front, like as soon as possible, just to get it out of the way. I don't know. You don't want to, I think it's harder almost to experience the love you could have had until you tell them. I don't know.
Well, to be, really frank with you, I had never thought of this in reunion until I interviewed Liz Laddie. And she said some similar things, except that she did come out to her biological father, who happened to be evangelical Christian. And so she was very nervous. And I remember that conversation very well, because I was just like, oh my word, like it's something that, someone like myself, like I just never would have thought of that. It's that whole extra pressure and layer. And so thank you for sharing those pieces with us, because a lot of us have no idea what that would be like. And to just be able to kind of experience that with you is really meaningful. And I think it'll be really helpful for a lot of people listening. Okay. You've shared some really hard stuff, and I'm kind of laughing, but it's not funny. It's just really challenging things. And I'm wondering how you navigated this, like, did you reach out for help in some way? Like, were you walking this alone? I mean, this is really, really deep life stuff as a young person. What were some of the things that you did to cope and make sure that you were safe as you did this?
Sure. So it's been 3 years since I first met my mother. And if I'm being honest, for the first 2 years, I did nothing. This time for me, I mean, it was extremely difficult, not only because I was grappling with this story about my relinquishment and my conception, but in this time frame, from slightly before I, got the non-identifying information until now, I've lost 5 family members, and that one person that I had dated in that coming out story. And so I was dealing with a lot of grief at the time. And so for the first 2+ years, I was definitely in the fog. I was definitely just trying to survive. Like, I can't give you any advice at that time other than I was alive and functioning slightly. But I ended up going to grief counseling, actually, because in my town, therapists are in short supply and I could only get into group counseling. And so I decided to do a writing grief group counseling session. And in my intake session, I learned that my therapist was also adopted and that she was also conceived via rape.
Come on.
Yeah, just serendipitously, like out of the blue, I went to her grief counseling. Like, she's also experienced a lot of grief, which is what motivates her to focus in the areas of grief and adoption. And she does some other things as well. But those are two of her primary focuses.
So you went to a group session that's supposed to be focused on grief, and your therapist just happens to be a fellow adoptee who was also conceived in rape. Wow. Yeah, that's serendipitous.
Yep. Yeah. So she has been invaluable in my experience and in like my coming out of the fog journey. Like, she's kind of what catapulted that. Like, if you had talked to me last summer about adoption, even, I would have said, oh, no big deal. It had no effect on me. Like, I'm grappling with this story, but I'm not grappling with, relinquishment and adoption and the effect that has on me at all. Like, that's no big deal. Not that I was really processing or coping with the conception story very much as well. Like, I wasn't really doing anything for that either. So she was helpful on both fronts, and she was also helpful on like just like general grief counseling.
And in the group, was anyone else adopted? Like, did that come up as a topic of discussion, or was that more just your conversations with her?
Yeah, so I ended up going to her one-on-one. She was able to get me in after the fact. But the grief counseling was interesting because everyone else in the group had also lost a parent, but they kind of had that rosy, angelic narrative around the person that they had lost. Like, they kind of were speaking of their parents as if they were martyrs. And I think to a point that's helpful. But for me, I had, I loved my mother. And in some ways, I honored that relationship, but there were also really difficult things. And I felt like I couldn't deal with that in that group because everyone else had a very idyllic parental situation for the person that they had lost.
Yeah. Wow. That is, I don't know. Like I can't, 6 losses. Like that's a big number. Like this is a huge upheaval in your life. All of these different things and 6 losses. And what pushed you to find that group therapy class? Like what was just like, I have to go, I have to do something?
It probably was, the fifth person that I had lost. It was my cousin who I was very close to. And then my uncle died, just a few months after that. And I think I just kind of had this moment of reflection of, I am surviving, but it feels like I have a lot that's unprocessed right now. And I really should get myself into therapy. Like it felt like the logical thing to do at the time. I mean, I'm very composed and calm in times of crisis. And because this happened one after the other, it's almost been like I've been in survival mode like this whole time. And then I kind of had to take a step back and say, all right, you need to get out of survival mode and like really deal with everything that's been happening.
All right. I appreciate you sharing that. And I think it's so important for us to kind of pay attention to when it's time. Like it's time to go. And it's not always the easiest thing to do. I appreciate you sharing that. Is there anything that I didn't ask you, Mary, that you really want to talk about before we do recommended resources?
So Ron has 4 sons, 2 through my biological aunt, Katie. So they're my cousin brothers, which is gross. And I met them, Jake, one of the brothers, who's only 2 months younger than me. So basically the same age exactly, because I was 2 months premature, ended up telling Ron about me. And so he got, my phone number, he got my social media profiles, he got my name, my pictures, he knew where I worked. And so there was this whole crazy time where, I had to tell not everyone, I had to tell my manager and some coworkers at work what the situation was, which is not something I ever wanted to do. And we thought we might have to take him to court because he was actually able to get his records sealed and he doesn't show up on a sex offender registry list. And we wanted to make sure that the restraining order that was placed when I was a baby, like still applied. And we ended up being able to get the records like out of court and everything, which is good. And I haven't heard from him since, but yeah, he like looked at my LinkedIn profile. You know how you can see who's viewed your LinkedIn profile?
Yes.
So his name like popped up in my LinkedIn profile, which really freaked me out.
Oh, talk about just a privacy violation. Like I feel kind of icky just like hearing it, and it's not my experience. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, there's a lot of complexity to your story. My goodness. Do you have any final thoughts for another adoptee who finds out this really, shocking information when they search and find out they were conceived in rape and what that kind of looks like? Do you have any advice for someone who gets that shocking news?
It's been helpful for me to, I think, trust myself. I think I personally can be easily bogged down in this story and kind of pinpointing the influence that Ron might have had on me or nature versus nurture. And so it's easy to kind of lose yourself and sit in the anger and the pain of the story, but to understand that, you are more than what happened to you and that you're your own person and that you have to trust and, I don't know, love yourself. I know that sounds corny, but it's a part of your identity, but you can't let it define you without taking into consideration everything else that you are.
Wise. Thank you. Okay, Mary, let's do our recommended resources. And why don't you go first? What did you want to recommend to us today?
Sure. There is a photo series called Meeting Sheila, and it's actually by someone I went to high school with, and we're not friends or anything, just, mutuals on social media. And she is obviously adopted, and she's a professional photographer. And she created this photo series of the first time that she met her birth mother. And I think what's really special about it is that it shows candid moments, and it also shows really poignant moments. And it kind of really exemplifies to me the reverence that we have when we meet our first parents, especially the same-sex first parent, where you're kind of looking for yourself in them. There's this one picture where they're like comparing feet, and you can tell that they're really similar, which I think is really sweet. So I would give it a look.
These are really unique and just like a really intimate view of a reunion. I spent way too much time looking at these when you sent them to me because they're really moving. And I wasn't sure what to expect when I clicked on that link, and it's so worth it. So I will definitely put a link to that in the show notes. And beautiful series, Meeting Sheila. Okay, well, I knew a little bit of what we were going to be talking about today, and so I thought I would recommend something that Liz Laddie has posted on her website. And it's from a couple of years ago, but she was a part of an adoptee roundtable at the City University of New York. And it's a queer trans national adoption politics roundtable. And it is available on her website. If you go to liz-laddie.com and just click on watch or listen, you can view this whole presentation in its entirety. And so you hear from multiple adoptee voices from different perspectives. And it is really powerful. And I learned a lot from it. If you're interested in activism, if you knew exactly what Mary meant when she said intersectionality, this really brings those things together. And so I would highly recommend that you give that a watch when you have a couple hours, some quiet Saturday. Liz is great. You got to be following her, and she's a part of this roundtable. And of course, you would recognize some of the other adoptee voices on this. Mary, where can we connect with you online?
You can connect with me on Instagram. And as I've warned Haley, it's a funny username. It is homo_mojo. So HOMO_MOJO.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, even the really challenging parts. And I think it'll be really helpful for a lot of our listeners. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
I am so grateful for everyone who shares their story on the podcast, and especially when it is such a personal, challenging, oh my goodness. I mean, what do you even say about some of the things that Mary has had to process? If this brought up some challenging things for you today, can I just encourage you to find some support, give a friend a call, or you can Google crisis hotline in your area. I know I have people listening all around the world, so I don't want to give out a phone number that doesn't work where you are. But if you Google crisis support line, you can always find someone to jump on the phone with you. And I am just kind of blown away by the community that we've built here, where adoptees can come and share in a safe space and support each other via a podcast. I mean, who knew that would happen. So Mary is actually one of my monthly supporters, and I'm so grateful for her ongoing support. When we ended our call, I thanked her and I told her truly, and I mean this, without people like Mary signing up for monthly support of the podcast, I wouldn't be able to do it. And so I'm so grateful. If you want to join Mary and about 120-ish other monthly supporters, if you go to adopteeson.com/partner, there's details there of the bonuses you get when you are a monthly partner, including, did you know there's a whole other weekly podcast that I do with some rotating co-hosts? It's called Adoptees Off Script. And if you are subscribed to this podcast, you would have heard a few of those. I aired them in September 2019 on the main feed. And so I hope that you enjoyed those. One other way you can support the podcast is by telling just one other person about it. Do you know another adopted person? Pick a favorite episode and ask them to listen to it and let them know what you think. Let you know what they think. Let them. It's very late when I'm recording this. I'm sorry. Word of mouth is how most people find out about podcasts. So I thank you so much when you share the show. Thanks so much for listening. Let's talk again next Friday.